everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Create Your Purpose interview series. You all know me, I'm Quinn Tempest, but I have a very, very special guest today, special to me, and I'm sure special to you soon after this talk, Sophie Bujold. She will be chatting with me about community building online. And just before we start, I wanted to share that Sophie has been helping me personally shift my business model since I think fall of last year, 2018. We've been working really closely together. She has been absolutely transformative for me, and I've never really asked for help before, so this was a big step for me. So thank you, Sophie, first and foremost. And would you be able to just share with everyone who you are, what you do, kind of your story of how you got to where you are now, and what your whole work is all about?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, it's a privilege to be here. I totally adore you, and it's great to be able to share my story with everyone. So as you mentioned, I work in the community building space. It's a space that I've been in since the 90s. So I was actually on the internet and in chat rooms and doing all the things before it was a cool thing to do. And really started seeing very early on in those days, even as a teenager, the power that meeting other people from other places in the world and like connecting with them and creating a shared experience really had even on my life. And just as a very quick example, my husband and I met in those same chat rooms, and we've been together for about 20 years now, which feels really old. But you know, I was able to create those bonds and those relationships really early on. And when I started in the workforce after that, you know, I have a background in communications and in the education sense of things, but when I started in the workforce, this internet thing was really just taking off. So people were starting to look at getting strategic with their websites and getting content out there. And like, it was just the early seeds of all the stuff that we now know as email marketing and content marketing and social media. And I was kind of the, speakerphone or the megaphone, if you want, for the fact that we could use those channels to start creating connections with people. And one of the things I heard really often is that, no, there's just no way you can use a machine to create a human connection. And really, I think I very unconsciously made it my mission at that point to say, let me show you how, and let me prove you wrong on that. So the rest of the work that I've done since then has really been centered around how do we use technology and how do we use the internet to create as human as possible of an experience for people so that people feel connected and they really buy into either what you're selling or what other people around them are doing so that they can help each other. So, I mean, if I run through my experience, I've worked in digital marketing departments for the travel industry. So I spent almost 12 years in those departments helping people. I mean, luckily the travel industry is an industry that really relies on those connections. So I was helping people understand, again, how to use social media marketing and start building their communities in there. I was also managing communities internally. So, you know, we had communities of up to 1,200 travel agencies across North America that needed to connect and share and interact. So I was helping with those things within the organization and managing those communities. And I was also teaching. So teaching others how to do the same. I also had experience outside of work, managing online forums and really just, you know, getting a feel for what it was like to be in an online community and seeing the dynamic and really experiencing like, oh, when we do this, this is what happens, and this is a good idea versus this is not a good idea. So I branched out on my own about 8 years ago and started really focusing at that point on teaching things like social media marketing and all those, but really in the context of how do you use those tools not only to market yourself, but to really create an authentic connection with your audience so that they feel that you have their best interests at heart, which helps business in the long run. You know, the whole point of what I do now, which is really working with people who either have a membership community or online courses or a business where they want community to sit at the center and be a major part of their business model, make that happen. So figuring out what they need to do to make it manageable and profitable and sustainable for the business, but also a place where people love to be, that they're sharing with one another, and that they're connecting with other people who might be doing the same thing. So yeah, that's been a little bit of my journey through the whole thing. It's been a wild ride. It's been really interesting to see how communities evolve online. And obviously we are way more literate nowadays on how things work online, but it's still something that a lot of people struggle with is, how do I market with this thing that kind of has a life of its own? Because you really can't control connection 100%. So it's one of those things where you need to figure out where that balance is, and that's where I help out.
Yeah, and I think from my experience working with you, the struggle to create a community that's uniquely your own as an entrepreneur is difficult. And I remember I was in the process of looking for someone to help me do what you do, but I had no idea what that was called at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was looking to see, is there a membership community strategist, or like I didn't even have the words for what I needed. And I remember I had taken a course maybe a year and a half ago from a woman named Christine about web design processes. And so I was just on her website checking out her portfolio just to see kind of who she worked with and who her clients were. And I ended up stumbling on your website, of all people. And I loved your business name. It's called Clickworthy, but it's not click as in the mouse on your computer. It's click as in clicks and communities and friends. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so I remember starting to look through your website and just immediately feeling that internal click with the CK, not the Q. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. This is someone who could take all of my ideas, all my vision, and help me turn my audience into a community. So I remember that's how I found you, and just being amazed by all the stuff that you had on your website, of knowing that this was what I needed as an online entrepreneur. So could you maybe speak to that idea of what the difference is between an audience and a community? Because I think that's where I had no idea how to transition. I knew I had a lot of followers. I had people on my email list. I had people talking to me all the time, but I didn't know how to capitalize on that and turn that into a community. So what's the difference? Do you see a difference, and how do you approach that whole thing?
Yeah, I absolutely see a difference. And that's something that I definitely need to help clients understand the distinction, because I think the word community over the years has been morphed into this concept of like anyone who follows what you have to say is part of your community. And really, for me, that's not what defines a community. So in the context of an audience, you usually find audiences on things like Facebook pages, Instagram profiles, Twitter accounts, even email lists. And for me, what defines that audience is the fact that for those people, yes, they're kind of in a group, like they may be on your mailing list, which is kind of a container for where you keep your people. The only thing that links those people together is the fact that they're following you and listening to what you have to say. Really, if you remove yourself from the equation, most of those people will likely drift off and go on to other things and listen to other people. In a community setting, the bonds are decentralized. So they're not necessarily like, if Quinn goes away, chances are that people in the community will still want to talk to one another, and the community can live independently. It doesn't mean that you can't have a role as one of the leaders and maybe setting the tone in the conversation or setting guidelines for what needs to be, acceptable and not acceptable in the community. But it means that essentially, if you can remove yourself from the equation, there is still an ecosystem there of people who care about each other, who are rooting for each other, who are really interested in what you have to say, that really doesn't exist in the audience sense of things. Now, is there ever gray areas? Like I have seen Instagram communities, for instance, kind of step into the boundary of community where people have started to meet up with one another and connect with one another through the comments, but it's usually the exception, not the norm. So, one of the things that I sometimes get is people coming to me saying, well, I need help expanding my Instagram audience or whatever else. And that is a social media strategist. That is what they do. That is not what I'm good at. What I'm good at is really creating these little online ecosystems where people get to really connect deeply, talk to one another, support one another, and do it in a way that feels true to whatever business is tied to the equation.
And I was reading something you wrote. You said something like people gather around a shared purpose and
Yes.
they connect and stay engaged. So it almost seems as if the community aspect is where you take the general interest of the audience, but then you plot people together with that shared purpose so that they can really grow together. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's absolutely true as well. Like most people will not gather if there's no purpose to that group. There needs to be like a commonality, whether it's a fan club for a celebrity or an online group for people who are just getting started in business and need to understand how to launch it, or whatever that is. You need to really get in touch with, why that community needs to exist and what purpose it's going to serve in the life of the people it's helping. And the reason I'm such an advocate of that, and I think that's where we connect because you're doing a lot of work around that area too, is it makes decision-making a million times easier when you understand what your mission is with whatever you're creating. And that kind of is a universal truth for marketing, for whatever else. But I have seen a ton of communities out there that haven't gotten clear on their purpose. And those are usually the ones that start having trouble and start stumbling after a while. So yeah, in my mission to make these things sustainable, it's really important that we understand what we want to be delivering and what we want to be helping people connect on.
That is so important. I see it all the time with my clients in branding and web design. And the first step that they're taking to build the audience aspect of their business is that when they aren't clear on what they want to do and who they want to do it for, it just comes out like it's all over the place. It's frazzled, it's disjointed, and they don't feel good about it because they don't know what they're doing. And I think one of the biggest parts of the process that I found powerful for me that you led me through was you asking me, what does this community need to do for you, Quinn?
Yes.
And then what do you want it to do for the people in it? And then the third question, I think, is what is the transformation that you want to facilitate for your members? Yeah. And so are those three questions and that kind of strategic discovery process, is that you helping your clients and the entrepreneurs you work with get at that deeper purpose to make sure that their community works?
Bingo. Because if you ask someone most of the time, like, what's the purpose of this? They won't have a very clear answer on it. So every process or every person that walks through working with me gets asked those questions, and we spend, it's not a 5-minute question. As you saw, like you had to reflect on it a little bit and really get and it changes as we're working. Sometimes as we get into further steps, it's like, oh, well, how does this fit into the greater purpose of what we're doing? This is really important. Let's go back and revisit what we thought was the purpose of this and see, do we need to adjust the purpose or do we need to adjust what we're doing? Mm-hmm. So that happens a lot, and it's very normal. Like it's, I always encourage clients to come in with this curiosity and like this spirit of always just being open to what comes out throughout the process, because what feels like it should be probably a very mechanical thing of like, okay, I want to create this group. What platform do I use? What tactics do I use? What kind of content do I post? Really has a deeper meaning in it if you really want to make it sustainable and long-term. So that's where those questions come in. And I think it's really important. It's something that gets overlooked a lot. And I think we do the same as business owners when we're creating services and products and things like that. We forget to ask, like, what do I need out of this? And where's the intersection between what the customer wants and what I need? Because that's really the sweet spot of what you need to create. It's not about doing more on one side and the other. They need to be balanced and they need to really work with one another. Otherwise, if it's too focused on the customer, you're going to get overwhelmed, bored, whatever, feeling that makes you want to just give it up.
Yeah.
And from the customer side, if it's too heavily focused on you, they'll feel like you have an agenda, and they'll start tuning out, very honestly.
And honestly, I think this process has been challenging for me, but so rewarding, because we did talk about formats last. It was honestly
Yep.
almost the last like 2 weeks of
Yep.
our 90-day project was talking about, okay, well, now we did all this big philosophical hard purpose work. Now, what does that look like in the real world? Whereas, I think a lot of people out there probably start the other way, where they say,
Yep.
okay, what do you want? And then maybe they don't even get to the big meaning behind it. And so I think we almost spent 2 months on the greater impact that I wanted to make, not just for the people in the community, but I think most interestingly for me as an entrepreneur. I think one of the things that came out of it was I wanted to do this so that I could set myself up to have a family someday. And I didn't realize that I didn't realize that coming into working with you. I think it was just in the back of my head that I need to shift my business model and I need to do it for XYZ reasons. And it ended up being that, oh, well, I want to do that because I want to have a baby at some point, not anytime soon.
Yeah.
It's like a really personal reason that I felt like was powerful and resonant for me before I started to think about, okay, how is this going to actually come out in a format, and what do I want it to do for the people that are in the community? And I thought that was really powerful to understand, not just the business level, but the personal perspective that would be driving all of this for the solopreneur.
Yeah, and I think the magic of doing it with someone else, and us working together, is that while you think that we only worked on the formatting and the tools and that for the last 2 weeks, like that was always in the back of my mind as you were answering questions in terms of guiding what decisions we make for, what is the format? What are the things we need to talk about? What are the things you might need to go get, or resources or things like that? So that when it came down to putting the plan together, it really narrowed down our options, which I think is really important too, because, I love our online marketers. There's nothing wrong with them, but community has been the latest trend in what they use to market their services. So what has come out of that, and there's always healthy and unhealthy things that come with everything, but I think what's come out of that is almost a commoditization of community, where it's seen as this big tactic as opposed to being this place of gathering. And there's a place for those marketing groups, absolutely. But I think for people like you, or for the clients that I work with, they want to create something that's for the long term, that they enjoy, that's really valuable, that has an impact. And you really just can't do that by taking the blueprints that are floating out there and just applying it to you, because that blueprint wasn't created for you. It doesn't have your why in it. It doesn't have who you are, and it doesn't have your zone of genius of how you operate in the world. And unless you're able to make that transition yourself into thinking strategically with that blueprint, chances are it just won't work. And you're going to end up with something that you're really struggling to either keep up with or just not really enjoying. And I've seen that so many times.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've been pondering since we've worked together is just how this approach would work for so many of the people I connect with who consider themselves to be purpose driven, is that the blueprints are out there, they're sexy, they're quick, but like you said, they don't make the impact that they want to make. And I found that, at least in my life and the people I work with, we really want everything we do to be reflecting our true self and our deeper values. Yeah. And that includes the people that we attract into our tribe. And so I was wondering, for a lot of the people I work with, they're not to this point yet. They're still building their audience. They're still building their brand and still setting down the foundation of their online presence. So what do you think a lot of these people need before considering a community? Is it a list of a certain size? Is it a digital marketing strategy? What are the elements that make it viable to start thinking about building a community?
Well, I think, I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to have an audience already built, but I wouldn't necessarily let that stop someone from wanting to create a community environment. I think, though, some of the things I look for in people who are ready to do the work that we did is, you know, at least a couple, I don't want to say years, but some experience under your belt and knowing what works and what doesn't work in your business, and a basic or even kind of intermediary understanding of your customer and what they want. You don't need all the answers because we can do the research as we're working together on exactly what they might need and like all those things. But the basic understanding and the fact that you've been able to sell product or sell your services fairly consistently and successfully is definitely a really good starting point, because that means that you are kind of past that hump of understanding what will work in terms of how you can help people. So that would be the very bare minimum. If I would go into like a wish list from that, is a rough idea of what you want to deliver or the impact that you want to have with that community. A reason why you think community might be the best way to deliver what you want to deliver is another really good one. And again, this is like wish list stuff, but if you have that audience or you've started to at least build your email list and things like that, that obviously makes it easier once you get to the point of, okay, we're going to launch either a beta or whatever that is. That definitely helps, but I wouldn't necessarily let it dissuade you from trying. Like if you just haven't built a list in your business, but you have clients, that's kind of a list in its own, right? So I don't want to say like, absolutely you need X amount in your email list. To me, that doesn't really matter. If you can create value, people will find it and people will come to it. So I would say that really those reflection points first and foremost, like why do you think community is a good tool for you? Which is a question that I think a lot of people also forget to ask about a lot of other things in their business. Why do I feel like I need this? And if the answer is, well, other people tell me I should, to me, that's not a great answer. Is you need to understand how it fits within your business model, and what you want to do and how useful it'll be for you, because otherwise, you know, you might be wasting your time with it. So yeah, just getting that rough idea of like, maybe what you do would be better served in a group that can support one another, or you want to be able to reach a lot of people and have them actually be their support system for each other, because there's benefit to that in terms of what you're offering or whatever that is. And, you know, if there are some goals that are completely self-servant, like I work best if I can have all the questions I need to answer in one group, that's okay too, but it shouldn't be your only purpose. Shouldn't be the only thing you want out of this community. Yeah, so starting that reflection, and obviously I help you kind of close that loop once we start working together, but definitely just getting that initial, like, why am I doing this? You know, it's a little bit going into what Simon Sinek says all the time, start with why. Understand why you're doing the thing, understand why it's going to be useful, and then think about what you need to include in it, or why the things you think you need to create need to be in there in order to serve and deliver.
And I'm really interested too, because I'm at the place, as you know, where I'm building out all of the content to create my own community experience, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the fall of this year. And
little prequel announcement there.
Yeah, a little announcement is happening. And people kind of know. It's been tough though, because I don't want to share until I know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I want to at least have a general idea of my own why and my own impact before I'm like, okay, here it is. But since you also work with people with existing communities, don't you do audits? Like you actually go in and look at what's working, what's not working. Could you share a little bit about that process and, you know, what those elements are of a successful community versus one that kind of flounders?
Yeah. So yes, we absolutely do. So if you've been listening to this going, this is great, but I already have a community, now what? I also help those people. And what we do is very much a similar process, but we also include an audit of what your community is at this point. So the process typically includes or kicks off with me interviewing the owner. So we have a kickoff session where I'm talking to you about things like, what do you love about your community? What do you don't love? What are you hoping this community will do for you? What are some of the sticking points right now? And just getting kind of a holistic view of like almost like a preliminary diagnosis, if you want. And then my team and I get to work on kind of validating what you're saying and observing what's really going on. So what that entails is we'll do some member interviews directly with your membership. So we'll get you to draft a list of members we can contact. We'll get in touch with them and have a 30-minute interview just to get their feedback on what's going on or any concerns that you want us to touch on. We'll also take a look, obviously, at analytics. If you have anything, like Facebook Groups has stats. We run some diagnostic stuff in the background. Those are some big words, but we take a look at the numbers, basically, of what we're seeing. And then we do some observation of what's going on in the community as a whole for a couple weeks. And then we bundle that into a findings report for you of what we understand you're hoping to create versus what's actually happening, and include some recommendations of how we can move forward from there. And then we work with you for a couple months as you're like thinking through the process of, is this still fitting within what I want to create? How do I correct course? Where do I need to adjust? And make all those changes within the community. So it's a pretty intense process as well.
Do you see commonalities between communities of things that don't work? Is it too much content, not enough content, too much engagement? What are some of those themes that you see?
So I think the constant in community and in interactions in general is value. So, where most people tend to get caught up is they're like, well, how many posts do I need per week? And what do they need to say? And all those things. But it's really about the value you're delivering. So I have seen communities that have posts, once a month, once a couple weeks, and they do fine because what they're delivering is really meaty and really valuable. Whereas others could be posting every day, and every piece of content is tailored to what their community wants to see. And that's working really well there. So I don't think it lies in the mechanics as much as what value are you providing, and how well does it align with what your people need. If you think about it in real life, and this is kind of one of my tenets when I'm creating anything online is, if I were interacting with this person or these people in a room face to face, how would that interaction go? And then it's like, what can I do online that emulates that as closely as possible? So in terms of the value you're providing, it's the same thing. You don't go to a networking event if you don't think it's not going to be worth your while. So if you make it, the more valuable you make it for people attending, the better it is. So I think that's the first one, is what value are you providing, and how well does it align with the expectation of the people you're serving? I think the other thing is you need to realize that even though you are the leader or the creator of the community is really not about you. So where I see people failing is that they create these communities thinking that it is their right and their opportunity to market to people 24/7. So content becomes about them a lot. It becomes about, dropping truth bombs or asking questions as if they're coaching people, rather than talking with them and having a discussion and a conversation. So I hope that makes sense. But, I think there's a lot of communities that are falling in that trap right now of like, they'll get set up, for instance, for a product launch or whatever else. There's a lot of activity during that time. Then they drop off. Then they come back and it's another launch. And there's no like ongoing conversation. There's no entertaining. There's no, if you invite people to your house for dinner, you're not just going to sit them at the dinner table. You're probably going to have drinks before, entertain them a little bit, feed them, invite them to come back later, and do the same cycle over and over again. And the community is the same thing. You have to think of it as a relationship and not just something that serves the business. So I think that's the other really big sticking point. And I mean, to kind of wrap all of that up, I think it really does come back to the work we do on purpose, on understanding, like, what do you want people to get out of this? And it's something that a lot of people don't think about in terms of being a feature of a community, that there's a transformation that happens in it. And I get that pushback a lot once I get to, like, what transformation do we want to create in here? And, like, putting it on a timeline of when people are entering, where are they in terms of their mindset and what they're doing and what they're worrying about and what they need. And by the time they become a member, maybe a founding member or someone who doesn't need the community anymore, because it happens, we want them to stay forever. But, there's a point where people just kind of get what they need and they leave. What does that person look like? They're not the same person. They've gotten something out of it in order for the community to be valuable to them. So we kind of start thinking of, what is that transformation we want to facilitate, and what are the steps that we make? And for instance, I'll give you a real world example of a community I worked in. This particular community had people coming in with a very, like, technical thing. They wanted to learn Photoshop. But by the end of it, what they were realizing is that what they learned to do in Photoshop could now be a viable business for them. And they were thinking a lot more like a business owner. They wanted real world experience. They were looking for clients. They were wondering about marketing and things like that. So we were able to adjust the content in the community, because it included course content, to really start catering to those beginners when they're joining the community looking for stuff on Photoshop. We created sections of content, just, hey, here's your Photoshop tutorial. Once you're done that, here are the other things you can learn. And then just started creating content sections for every single stage that they were in. We would have never found that out without talking to the membership and without actually taking a look at what is that map and that transformation that people go through as they're going through. So that was a simple tweak that we made that made the community much more valuable for the members, and it boosted engagement, it boosted retention. People weren't dropping off as quickly because they understood that there was value there, and they started showing up more. So that's just one, like, super quick example of how these things, and the reason we put a lot of time into thinking about the philosophical questions is because that's how it starts transforming into the strategy piece after.
Yeah, and I think that piece of it, the transformation map, was probably the most powerful for me. Obviously, the more personal aspects of why I want to shift my business model and what impact I want to make were awesome. But I think once I saw the power of the transformation I could facilitate for people, I immediately felt empowered. I felt excited. Yeah. And then the formats, like you mentioned earlier, kind of just perfectly came out of that without trying too hard. The offers that I have been building into the community plan now map up perfectly with the different stages. And I honestly see endless opportunities. Yes. One of my biggest things was I want everything we're doing together to become my business model for 5-10 years, and for one day to almost step out of it. And it can be its own philosophy on its own. And I think now I have this amazing living, breathing map and document that I can reference back to in that whole life cycle of what I'm working on. And that felt the most powerful. And I've even been having my clients do that now, thinking of, what happens before they come to you? What do they do when they're with you? And where do you lead them? And it's a perfect extension of purpose. And it's a perfect extension of the impact that you want to create through your business, through the most powerful medium, which is people.
Yeah.
I think that was the most powerful part of this all for me.
Yeah. And I think, it's amazing what can happen when you have people on your side. And to me, obviously marketing has its place, and I would never say don't look at marketing tactics. But to me, the real power in everything that I do has really come from creating connection with people. And that it was never through, the perfect funnel or the ads or whatever else. Like I said, they all have have their purpose, excuse me. But that has not been the core for me of how I've been able to operate and be of value and be of service. It's always been through creating connections and doing that for businesses. And a lot of the communities that we put out there, what ends up happening is, obviously you have to market the community at some point to get members in it. But once that starts rolling, marketing costs usually end up going down, because what you're creating is this environment of people who are your brand champions, and they believe in you, and they're joining this because they understand that you as a business wanted to bring those people together. And the more value you can create in even connecting those people with one another, the more buy-in you'll have once it's time to start selling things from these people saying, hey, this is a great person, you need to trust them. Like, your trust factor goes up at the same time if you do it right. And the conversation in a community should never start with, look at what I'm selling. It should be, how can I help you? And from that, how can I help you, people will naturally start asking, what can I buy from you? And it may not be everyone, but if you do it right, you'll see it. And I think we saw it in the community for Christine that you mentioned. Once she started, she got the engagement formula right. Like, there was a really good balance for her between her being able to sell her programs and the community being there and them helping one another. So much so that when she got to her launches, she didn't even need to ask anyone for endorsements or testimonials, because they just started coming naturally. She would post in the group and people would go, this program was the best investment I've ever made. You're not going to regret it. She's not paying me to say this. Like, if you have questions, let me know. I'll answer them, like the whole thing. So over time, her marketing costs started being way more cost efficient, because she had to do less and less of that and more, just talking to the community and interacting with people.
That's powerful too, when you can have a sustainable strategy that feels you. That is very Christine. She doesn't want to, she doesn't want to push. And I think the more and more we've worked together, the more I've built confidence in my own inner guidance of, okay, what feels right to me and what doesn't feel right. For example, we hopped on a strategy call with my Facebook ad strategist, who's awesome. And she's told me what I needed to do a large marketing campaign to launch everything that we've been working on. And I sat there for a couple weeks, noticing how emotional I would get to think about doing the big thing. Yeah. And while I will absolutely do that in the future, probably in another year, I knew it didn't feel right to me at this point in my business. So you and I hopped on another call to say, okay, how can we do this differently? How can we do this in a more sustainable way that makes you feel good? It makes you feel like you're not taking this huge risk that could fall you flat on your face. And so now we have a new strategy that has really helped me feel more confident in doing things slowly and doing things more in a me, Quinn way, versus a huge launch right out the bat, which has just never been my style. So I think the fact that you combine purpose and impact with the personal, intuition of the entrepreneur, the business owner you're working with, is just extremely powerful and gets people to get out of the mindset of like, you have to do it this way. You have to do a funnel. You have to do this. Because honestly, I've never seen those things work for the people I work with, because that's not what they value. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point. I mean, there are some people for whom launches work really well because it fits within who they are.
Yeah.
And it's their style, and they are naturally okay with having the spotlight on themselves and And that's totally fine. But there's other people for whom, you know, like we're picking on Christine today, but like Christine, she didn't feel like a digital marketer. She's like, I don't want to be in these endless launches. I don't want to be the face of the brand. Like my students are the superstars here because they're getting so many results. So the community just made sense for her because it gave her a space to help them within boundaries and then offer them, like, if you want to go deeper in that, here are the programs. And it was a natural conversation to have. And again, if you go to my guiding post of how would this conversation go in real life, that is absolutely how it would go. She would meet someone, she'd probably invite them to coffee at some point or invite them to an event where there's other of her clients, have a chat with them, help them out with the problem, and then go, oh, you need more help with that? Well, I have a program. If you want to check it out, I'm happy to talk about it. So it's a very natural conversation to have for her. And I think that's where the power of that community really came into play. But I think also what you touched on and what you were talking about, sorry, I'm losing my voice all of a sudden. What you touched on is the fact that this community strategy piece really straddles more than just let's create a group or a membership website or like a course support system. What we really dig deep into is how does this fit within your business and how do we make it profitable? You know, I had another client who described it as an elegant mixture of community strategy and business advice. Yeah. And I think that summarized it really well in that you can't create the community in a vacuum. You know, there are people who have just set up the Facebook group and gone and had success with it, and that's great. But for the majority, that's not the success story. You really need to create it thinking of how does this fit in? How do we make it work financially? And how does this even operate and serve us? And once you do that, then those are the communities that I see thriving. If you're not clear on that purpose from the beginning, it really, you know, doesn't spell good things in the long run. So.
Yeah, and I want to wrap up here, but I want to end on a question and a comment, because we've been talking a lot about the purpose of communities, the purpose of business owners and entrepreneurs. So Sophie, I want to turn it to you, since we had a 3-hour dinner in Seattle a few months ago.
Yes.
We talked about this idea of what your purpose is.
Yeah.
So would you be willing to kind of share your thought process on what your kind of overarching motivating intention is for both your life and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I miss anything from that 3-hour conversation, please prompt me and say, well, I remember you saying. But I think when you asked me that question over dinner and I started thinking about it, you know, my purpose is as a connector. So I connect things and people, whether it is online, whether it is offline. That's just what I do. If you know me, chances are that I've said to you more than once, you need to read this book, you need to meet this person. Have you heard of this idea? I think that it would actually be a good fit for what you're thinking about. And that's just what I do. So it's and it felt very natural once I said it out loud as we were talking, because I'm like, that's exactly what I do online as well, as I facilitate connection and I make sure that that connection is like solid and sustainable. So yeah, was there anything else that I said that was super insightful over 3 hours of wine?
Yeah, I think I was the only one drinking. So I know that was it. It was connecting. And I think you also said connecting the dots,
Yeah.
Which is the same thing. But I love that purpose for you because it's so clear in everything you do. And last week I wrote an email in my Postcards on Purpose series about
I saw it.
And it's about how purpose is not the format. It's not the what, it's the why. And you even just rolled off a couple things that you do to connect people and things, you know, books, community, your business, all of these different ways that you connect. And I think I see that in everything that you do. And it doesn't matter what it is. It more matters that you did it in the first place and the why behind it. So
Yeah.
I see that in your business. I see that with what you've done with me. And, you know, obviously I couldn't be more grateful, but I just think that once we as entrepreneurs know our purpose, even if it's as simple as I connect people and things, like that's amazing. Like for me, it's I bring ideas to life. It's not like this amazing, magical, like bonk on the moment, bonk on the head moment. It's just a statement that guides us forward. I think the more that we know that, the more intentional we can be in everything we do. And especially if you're looking to create a community, people will start to resonate with that message and attract, you know, you'll attract the type of people that you've always wanted around that common purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you're spot on with all of it. And for me, it's been such a strong drive for me my entire life. I mean, even being online so early on, that's what attracted me, was the ability to connect and learn about people and, you know, have these interesting and deep conversations with, you know, total strangers about, you know, all kinds of things, was probably my most exciting moment. And even nowadays, I live in an apartment building and I'm the one who started the community library downstairs so people could read good books and start connecting and doing all the things. So it's just, you know, once you got the words out of me, I started seeing it everywhere. So that's a testament to you as well on what you're able to bring out to people.
Yeah, I think we make it a big thing, and it doesn't need to be as big of a. It is a big thing, but it doesn't need to be as daunting to uncover your purpose. It could just be a simple statement that guides you forward. So
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I want to wrap this up because you and I tend to talk for hours at a time, and no one wants to listen to that. Well, I do, but where can everyone find you online? What's the best way to contact you? Is it through your website, email? Let us know.
Yeah, so the website has all of the above. So it'll have links to some of my social media profiles, and a contact form if you want to send me a note. And if you're interested in checking out our services, obviously it's on there. So we are at clickworthy.com, and that, as you said, is CLIQUE worthy.com. And yeah, everything is there for how to get in touch with us. And yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out with questions, kudos, complaints even. I don't know why they complain, but whatever you want to talk about, just send us a note. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie. I appreciate your insight, and I hope everyone learned a thing or two about communities today. Thanks again.